Jason's hands trembled as he stared at the shattered glass on the floor. His heart pounded like a drum, his breath short and ragged. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. He couldn't believe what had just happened. One small habit, one tiny, seemingly innocent action, had led to this moment. The siren screamed in the distance, growing louder with every second. He felt frozen, unable to move, as if the weight of his choices had pinned him to the spot. Just moments ago, everything was fine. Now, his world was unraveling. The front door burst open. Jason turned sharply, his pulse hammering against his skull. His mother stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with disbelief. Behind her, the flashing red and blue lights painted the walls in a chaotic swirl of color. Then the voice came, deep, commanding. Step away from the body. 2 months earlier, Jason sat at the back of his math class, doodling in his notebook. He wasn't paying attention as usual. Numbers didn't interest him. His teacher's voice faded into the background as he thought about the same thing he always thought about: how to make his life more exciting. Jason was 15 and sick of being invisible. He wasn't the smartest kid, the funniest, or the best at sports. People barely noticed him. He wanted something, anything, that would make him feel important. Then one day it happened. He saw a guy at the park flipping a coin. It was an ordinary coin, but the way the man handled it caught Jason's attention. With just a flick of his thumb, the coin spun high into the air, twirling like it was dancing before landing perfectly in his palm. Jason was mesmerized. The man noticed him staring and grinned. "Wanna try?" Jason hesitated but stepped forward. He took the coin, tried to flip it like the man had, but it wobbled and fell to the ground. The man chuckled and picked it up. "It's all about control," he said. "It's a simple habit. Just practice. Once you get good, you can use it for all sorts of things." Jason didn't understand what he meant, but he was intrigued. He spent the next week practicing the coin flip every spare moment he had. Soon, he could make it spin smoothly, catch it effortlessly, and even predict which side would land up. It felt cool. It felt like he finally had something. And then one day, he discovered something else. During lunch, he sat at his usual table, flipping his coin absent-mindedly, when one of the popular kids, Tyler, walked past. "Nice trick," Tyler said, stopping. "You play?" Jason frowned. "Play what?" Tyler smirked. "Come with me." Jason followed him behind the school, where a small group of students stood in a circle. In the center, 2 boys were betting on a coin toss. One of them flipped, the other called it. Whoever guessed right won the money. Jason watched, fascinated. "You want to try?" Tyler asked, tossing him a quarter. Jason hesitated, then nodded. He had been practicing for weeks. He could control this. He flipped the coin. The other guy called tails. Jason caught it, flipped it onto the back of his hand, and lifted his fingers. Heads. He won. The group murmured in approval. Tyler grinned. "You've got talent, man." From that moment, Jason was hooked. Every day after school, he joined the group behind the building. His habit of flipping the coin became more than just a trick. It became a game, a dangerous game. At first, he only played for small amounts. But as he got better, the stakes grew higher. And then, one day, someone lost more than just money. Jason stood across from Tyler in a high-stakes match. It wasn't just about cash anymore. Tyler had bet something different, something dangerous. Jason flipped the coin. Tyler called it. The coin landed. Silence fell over the group. Then, Tyler's face twisted with anger. "You cheated." Jason's stomach dropped. He knew what was coming before it even happened. Tyler lunged at him. The group scattered as the fight broke out. Fists flew, people shouted, and in the chaos, Jason heard a sickening crack. He stumbled back, gasping. Tyler wasn't moving. The sirens wailed in the distance. Jason's habit had changed his life, and not in the way he had hoped. The flashing red and blue lights flickered against Jason's pale face as he stood frozen, his heart slamming against his ribs. Tyler lay motionless on the cold pavement, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood pooled near his head. The air smelled like sweat, asphalt, and something metallic. Jason's mother stood in the doorway of their house, her face a mask of horror. The police officer, a tall man with a firm voice, stepped forward. "Step away from the body," he repeated, hand resting on his holster. Jason's breath came in short gasps. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. He had just been playing a game. A stupid game. A small habit. That's all it was. How had it led to this? Another officer moved toward Tyler, kneeling beside him, checking for a pulse. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Jason clenched his fists, trying to stop the shaking. "Is he?" Jason's voice was barely a whisper. The officer on the ground pressed his fingers against Tyler's neck. A pause. Then he looked up. "He's alive." Jason's legs nearly gave out. He felt dizzy, the world tilting as relief and fear crashed over him at the same time. "Get him in the ambulance," the officer ordered. Jason didn't even notice the paramedics arriving until they lifted Tyler onto a stretcher. His face was still, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. "Jason Woods," the first officer said, turning back to him. "Come with us." Jason swallowed hard, glancing at his mother. Tears streaked her cheeks. She didn't say a word, just placed a trembling hand over her mouth. The next moments were a blur. The ride to the police station, the cold, hard chair in the interrogation room, the officer sitting across from him, asking question after question. What happened? Jason told them everything. The coin toss, the bet, the argument, the way Tyler lunged at him first, how Jason had only shoved him back, not meaning to hurt him. The officer nodded slowly, taking notes. Jason's mother sat beside him, squeezing his hand so tight it hurt. "You're not under arrest," the officer finally said. "But we need to investigate. If Tyler presses charges, this could go to court." Jason felt like he had been punched in the stomach. "Court?" The officer stood. "Go home. Stay out of trouble." And Jason, his gaze was stern. Think about how this all started. Jason didn't need to think about it. He already knew. It had started with one small habit. The days that followed felt unreal. Jason couldn't focus on anything. He barely ate. He barely spoke. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Tyler hitting the ground. Then 3 days later, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Meet me at the park. 5 p.m. Don't be late." Jason stared at the screen. His fingers felt numb as he typed back. "Who is this?" No response. His mind raced. Was it Tyler? Had he woken up? Or was it someone else? Someone angry? A part of him told him to ignore it. But another part, the part that had always craved excitement, couldn't let it go. At 5 p.m., he arrived at the park. The wind howled through the trees. The sky was gray, heavy with the promise of rain. Jason's stomach twisted as he spotted a figure standing by the swings. A hood covered their face. He took a deep breath and walked forward. "Who are you?" Jason asked, his voice steadier than he felt. The hooded figure turned slightly, just enough for Jason to see their face. His blood ran cold. It wasn't Tyler. It was someone else. Someone he didn't recognize. And they were flipping a coin. Click. Spin. Catch. Jason's heart pounded as he realized this wasn't over. Not even close. Jason took an uneasy step back. The stranger stood still, flipping the coin over and over, the metallic clink echoing through the empty park. His face was mostly hidden under the hood, but Jason could see just enough, the sharp jawline, the cold stare. "You're Jason Woods, right?" The stranger finally spoke, his voice low and calm, like they were having a normal conversation. Jason's mouth felt dry. "Who are you?" The stranger didn't answer right away. Instead, he flicked the coin one last time, caught it, and then slowly slid it into his pocket. "I heard about what happened," he said, taking a step forward. "Tyler, the coin toss, the fight." His eyes locked onto Jason's. "I know you didn't mean for it to go down like that." Jason's heart pounded. "How do you know about that?" The stranger smirked. "People talk." Jason clenched his fists. "What do you want?" The stranger reached into his hoodie and pulled out a small, rolled-up wad of cash. He tossed it to Jason, who caught it out of instinct. Jason's fingers tightened around it as he glanced down, confused. "Consider it an invitation," the stranger said. "You've got a talent, and there are people who'd pay a lot to see it in action." Jason's stomach twisted. "You mean gambling?" The stranger chuckled. "Let's not call it that. Let's call it opportunity." Jason's mind spun. He had barely escaped trouble from the last game. "Now this?" "I'm not interested," Jason muttered, tossing the cash back at him. The stranger caught it easily and sighed. "Suit yourself." He turned to leave, but then stopped and looked back over his shoulder. "But think about it, Jason. One small habit brought you here. What do you think it could do for you if you actually controlled it?" Then, just like that, he was gone. Jason stood frozen, his thoughts racing. He needed to leave. He needed to forget about all of this. But as he walked home, the stranger's words echoed in his head. "One small habit brought you here." That night, Jason tossed and turned in bed, his mind refusing to rest. He thought about the first time he flipped a coin, the first time he won a bet, the rush he felt. He thought about Tyler lying on the ground. He thought about the stranger's smirk. The next morning, he woke up with a decision. He was done. No more coin flips. No more bets. He would walk away from all of it. Jason went through the day trying to ignore the itching in his fingers, the need to feel the coin between them. It was just a habit. He could break it. At lunch, he sat at his usual spot in the cafeteria, alone. He forced himself not to look at the kids gathered in their usual spots behind the school. But then his phone buzzed. A message. "Change your mind yet?" His blood ran cold. Jason didn't reply. He shoved his phone back into his pocket and tried to focus on his food. But the messages didn't stop. "There's a game tonight. High stakes. Your kind of thing. Don't ignore me, Jason." Jason swallowed hard. His pulse quickened. Whoever this was, they weren't just going to disappear. He needed to tell someone. His mom? No. She'd freak out. The police? He wasn't even sure if anything illegal had happened yet. He had to handle this himself. After school, he took a different route home, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes. The feeling of being watched crawled over his skin. Then, just as he was about to turn the corner to his street, a black car screeched to a stop in front of him. The back door swung open, and before Jason could react, two hands grabbed him and yanked him inside. The door slammed shut. The car sped off. Jason's breath hitched as the car lurched forward. The smell of leather and cologne filled the air. His heart pounded against his ribs as he twisted, struggling against the hands gripping his arms. "Let me go!" he shouted, but the sound was swallowed by the purring engine. The stranger from the park sat across from him, legs crossed, flipping that same silver coin between his fingers. Click, spin, catch. His hood was down now, revealing short dark hair and sharp, calculating eyes. "Relax, Jason," the stranger said smoothly. "We just want to talk." Jason's pulse roared in his ears. "Kidnapping isn't talking." The stranger chuckled. "Kidnapping is such an ugly word. Let's call it persuasion." Jason gritted his teeth. "Who are you?" The stranger flicked the coin one last time, caught it, and leaned forward. "Name's Darius." He nodded toward the guy holding Jason's arm. "And that's Vince." He's not much for conversation. Vince was built like a bulldozer, his thick arms crossed over his chest. He grunted but said nothing. Jason swallowed hard. "What do you want?" Darius smirked. I want you to listen. He leaned back, stretching his arms across the seat. You've got potential, Jason. I saw it the second I heard about you. The way you play, the way you win. Jason's fingers curled into fists. I'm not playing anymore. Darius sighed and shook his head. See, that's where you're wrong. He gestured around. You're already in the game. You just don't realize it yet. Jason's skin prickled. What do you mean? Darius tapped his fingers against the seat, like he was deciding whether to tell him. Then, with a smirk, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He tossed it onto Jason's lap. Jason hesitated before slowly unfolding it. His stomach clenched. It was a list of names. His name was on it. Jason Woods. So was Tyler's. So were a dozen others he didn't recognize. Jason looked up, his mouth dry. What is this? Darius grinned. A roster. Jason shook his head. A roster for what? Darius tilted his head. Let me ask you something, Jason. Did you ever wonder why that stupid little habit of yours, flipping a coin, felt so natural? Like it was something you were meant to do? Jason's stomach twisted. What are you talking about? Darius leaned closer, lowering his voice. You're not the only one who plays the game, Jason. There are others. People like you. People who have a knack for it. He nodded toward the list. Some figured it out early. Some needed a push. And some, he chuckled darkly, some needed to learn the hard way. Jason's mind raced. You're saying this is a thing? A real thing? Darius smirked. You tell me. He nodded toward the list again. Recognize any other names? Jason's eyes scanned the paper. Then his blood ran cold. One name stood out. Tyler Maddox. Jason's throat tightened. Tyler. He was on this list before the accident. Darius shrugged. He was playing, too. He just didn't know the stakes. Jason's stomach churned. What kind of game is this? Darius grinned. The kind that changes lives. Jason shook his head. No. I don't want any part of this. Darius sighed, tapping his coin against his knee. That's what Tyler said, too. Jason's breath hitched. What do you mean? Darius gave him a long, unreadable look. Then he snapped his fingers. Vince grabbed Jason's arm and yanked him forward. Hey! Jason struggled, but Vince was too strong. Darius leaned in, his voice low and deadly. Tyler didn't just fall, Jason. His eyes gleamed. He was pushed. Jason's heart stopped. The car screeched to a halt. Vince shoved the door open and, before Jason could react, shoved him out onto the pavement. Jason hit the ground hard, rolling onto his side as a black car sped off into the night. His head spun. His stomach twisted. Tyler was pushed. The game wasn't just a habit. It was something bigger. Jason sat there, gasping for breath as realization sank in. He wasn't just playing. He was trapped. Jason sat on the pavement, his mind spinning. The cool night air did nothing to stop the heat rising in his chest. He wanted to believe Darius was lying, that he was just trying to mess with his head. But something deep inside Jason told him it was true. Tyler was pushed. Jason shuddered. If Tyler didn't just fall by accident, that meant someone in the so-called game, had wanted him out. His hands curled into fists. The black car was long gone, leaving him alone under the flickering streetlights. He forced himself to stand, his knees wobbling. His house was only a few blocks away. He needed to get inside, think, figure out what the hell was happening. As he walked, he checked his phone. 10 missed texts, but they weren't from Darius. They were from an unknown number. Jason hesitated before opening them. Unknown. You shouldn't have ignored me, Jason. Unknown. Darius is right. You don't get to just quit. Jason's fingers shook. Unknown. If you stop playing, you'll end up just like Tyler. Jason's stomach lurched. He looked around, suddenly feeling watched. The street was empty, but his skin prickled as if eyes were on him. Who was sending these messages? Jason swallowed hard and ran the rest of the way home. Inside his house, Jason locked the door and leaned against it, trying to catch his breath. His mom was still at work, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. He went straight to his room, pulled the curtains shut, and flopped onto his bed. His mind wouldn't stop racing. He needed answers. Jason reached for his laptop and opened a search engine. He typed in, "underground betting games, high school?" Most of the results were useless. Gambling addiction articles, stories about illegal poker rings. Nothing about this. He tried again. Secret gambling groups, teenagers. Still nothing. Frustrated, he leaned back, rubbing his face. Then his phone vibrated again. Another unknown number. Unknown. Looking for something? Jason's blood turned to ice. He stared at the message. His breath caught in his throat. Whoever this was, they knew. Jason's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Should he reply? Ignore it? Then, before he could decide, another message came through. Unknown. Check your email. Jason's pulse hammered as he opened his email. A new message sat at the top of his inbox. No subject. No sender name. Just an attachment. A single video file. Jason hesitated. Every nerve in his body told him not to open it, but he clicked anyway. The screen flickered. At first, it was just static. Then the video sharpened. A dimly lit room. A table. For people sitting around it. Shadows flickered against the walls. Jason's heart nearly stopped when he saw the person in the center. Tyler. Jason gripped his phone tighter. Tyler sat stiffly, looking nervous. He had a coin in his hand. He was playing. Jason watched, his breath shallow. The others were older, maybe college students. Their faces were partially hidden by the dim light, but their voices were clear. "Your turn," someone said. Tyler hesitated. Then, slowly, he flipped the coin. It landed. Tails. A beat of silence. Then, suddenly, two hands grabbed Tyler by the shoulders. He jolted, struggling, his voice rising in panic. "No! Wait! The camera shook as chaos erupted. Tyler was yanked from his chair. The video cut to static. Jason sat frozen. His lungs refused to work. His best friend had been taken. This wasn't just a game. It was a trap. And Jason was next. A new message popped up. Unknown, your turn, Jason. Jason's hands trembled. He barely had time to react before a soft thud came from outside his window. A shadow moved. Someone was outside, watching him. Jason's breath hitched. The shadow outside his window barely moved, but he knew. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing by. They were watching him. His heart pounded in his chest as he slowly reached for his phone. He hovered over the emergency dial, his fingers trembling. Then, tap, tap, a slow, deliberate knock on the glass. Jason's entire body locked up. His room was on the second floor. No one should be able to reach his window. He swallowed hard and forced himself to move. He edged toward the curtain, pulse roaring in his ears. His fingers shook as he grabbed the fabric, his mind screaming at him to stop. Then, with one quick motion, he yanked the curtain open. His breath caught. A man stood on the narrow ledge outside. A black hoodie, face hidden in the shadows. Jason couldn't make out his features, but he knew this wasn't some random stranger. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, just raised one hand and slowly pressed a finger to his lips. Sure. Jason stumbled backward. His foot caught on the edge of his rug, and he crashed onto the floor. His phone skidded out of his grip. By the time he scrambled to his feet and looked back, the figure was gone. Jason's chest heaved. His hands were slick with sweat as he grabbed his phone and ran to his door, yanking it open. The hallway was dark and silent. He hesitated. Did he wake his mom? Call the police? No. They wouldn't believe him. They'd say it was just a prank, that he was seeing things. But he knew better. He wasn't imagining this. He had proof. Jason rushed back to his bed and pulled up the video again. His fingers hovered over the play button. Every nerve in his body told him not to watch it again, but he had to. He needed to see something he missed. He hit play. The screen flickered. The dimly lit room. The table. The people. Tyler. Jason forced himself to focus. He studied the other players, trying to get a clearer look at their faces. The lighting made it almost impossible. But then, one of them shifted, and Jason's stomach dropped. He recognized one of them. It was someone from school. A senior. Zane Carter. Jason's hands clenched into fists. Zane was one of those guys everyone knew, but no one really talked about. He wasn't a star athlete, wasn't a troublemaker, but something about him always felt off. And now Jason knew why. Zane was in on it. Jason's mind raced. He had to do something. He had to figure out what this game really was, how it worked, why they were picking people like him and Tyler, and most importantly, how to stop it. But before he could even think about his next move, his phone vibrated again. A new message. Not from the unknown number. This time, it was from Zane. Zane, meet me. Tonight. Alone. Jason's stomach churned. Another message popped up. Zane, you need to know the truth before it's too late. Jason stared at the screen, his pulse hammering. He had two choices. Ignore the message. Stay home. Pretend none of this was happening. Or meet Zane. And risk everything. Jason exhaled slowly. He knew what he had to do. He grabbed his hoodie, shoved his phone into his pocket, and slipped out the door. The air outside was crisp, the kind that made every sound sharper. Jason kept his head down as he walked, his hands shoved into his pockets. Zane's message had only given him a location, an old parking lot behind the abandoned movie theater. The place was deserted. Jason swallowed hard as he stepped onto the cracked pavement. A single street lamp flickered, barely lighting the area. Then movement. Jason tensed. Zane stepped out from behind an old dumpster, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. His expression was unreadable. You actually came, Zane said. Jason clenched his jaw. Tell me what's going on. Zane sighed, glancing around like he was making sure no one else was there. Then he stepped closer. The game, Zane said, voice low. It's not what you think it is. Jason narrowed his eyes. Then what is it? Zane hesitated. It's not just some underground gambling ring. It's older than that. It's bigger. Jason crossed his arms. Then explain it. Zane rubbed his face. I can't tell you everything. But listen, what happened to Tyler? It wasn't supposed to go down like that. Someone broke the rules. Jason's breath caught. Rules. Zane nodded. The game has rules. And consequences. His voice dropped. Tyler lost. But he wasn't supposed to die. Jason's chest tightened. So who killed him? Zane looked away. I don't know. Jason grabbed his arm. Don't lie to me. Zane flinched. I don't know, okay? All I know is that someone higher up made the call. Jason's pulse pounded. And what about me? Why am I on that list? Zane exhaled. Because you're a player, Jason. Whether you like it or not, you belong to the game now. Jason's hands clenched. I never agreed to this. Zane gave him a hollow smile. Neither did I. Jason took a step back, his mind reeling. He needed to get out of this. He needed to run. Then, suddenly, a car screeched to a stop at the edge of the parking lot. Doors slammed. Jason turned just in time to see two figures stepping out. One of them he recognized instantly. Darius. The other. Jason's stomach dropped. It was a man from his window, and he was holding a knife. Jason's breath caught as Darius grinned. Well, Darius said. Looks like you got our invitation after all. Jason's heart stopped. Then the man lunged. Jason barely had time to react. The The knife flashed under the flickering street lamp as the hooded man lunged straight for him. Instinct kicked in. Jason jumped back just in time, the blade slicing through empty air where he had been standing a second ago. His heart slammed against his ribs. Darius laughed. "Oh, you're fast. Good. That means you might actually have a chance." Jason didn't wait to hear more. He ran. His sneakers pounded against the cracked pavement as he sprinted toward the closest exit, the alley behind the abandoned theater. He didn't know where he was going, just that he had to get out. But before he could reach it, another figure stepped into his path. Jason skidded to a stop. It was Zane, and he wasn't moving out of the way. Jason's pulse roared in his ears. "Move, Zane." Zane didn't answer. His face was pale, but his hands were clenched into fists. He was blocking Jason's escape on purpose. Jason's chest tightened. "You set me up." Zane swallowed, looking guilty. "It's not like that." Jason didn't let him finish. He pivoted and bolted in the opposite direction, aiming for the street. If he could just get to an open road, find anyone, he could get help. But then, a sharp pain exploded in his shoulder. Jason crashed to the ground, his face scraping against the pavement. His vision blurred as he clutched his shoulder. Something wet, warm, blood. Jason groaned in pain, struggling to lift himself up. He twisted his head just in time to see the hooded man pulling his knife back. The blade was red. Jason's breath came in short gasps. He'd been stabbed. Darius crouched beside him, shaking his head with amusement. "Tisk TSK. Running never works, Jason." Jason clenched his teeth. He wouldn't go down like this. Not without a fight. Ignoring the pain, he kicked out as hard as he could. His foot slammed into Darius's knee, making him stumble. Jason didn't waste the opportunity. He pushed himself up, ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder, and ran. Darius cursed behind him. "Get him." Jason forced his legs to move, every step sending sharp pain through his body. He wasn't thinking, just moving. Ahead, the street loomed, glowing under bright lamplights. If he could just... A car sped past. Jason screamed for help. The car didn't stop. His stomach dropped. Then, another set of headlights appeared down the road. But this time, the car did slow down. Jason stumbled toward it, waving frantically. "Help! Please, I..." The car stopped. The door opened. Jason's breath caught. It was his mom. Relief flooded him. "Jason," she shouted, eyes wide in horror. "Oh my God, what happened?" Jason could barely speak. "Mom, we have to go. Now." She didn't argue. She just threw the car into drive. As the car sped forward, Jason turned his head and saw Darius standing under the street lamp, watching him go. He wasn't running after them. He wasn't even angry. He was smiling, like he knew something Jason didn't. Jason turned away, his pulse hammering. He had escaped, but deep down he knew this wasn't over. Jason slumped in the passenger seat, his breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. His shoulder burned, and he could feel the warm trickle of blood seeping through his hoodie. His mother gripped the steering wheel, so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Jason, what happened to you?" Her voice was sharp with panic. "Who did this?" Jason swallowed hard. He couldn't just blurt out the truth. He barely understood it himself. I got into a fight," he lied, his voice weak. His mom's eyes darted toward him, filled with disbelief. "A fight? Jason, you're bleeding." "I know, Mom. Please, just drive." She didn't press him. Not yet. She stepped harder on the gas, the tires humming against the pavement as the car sped toward home. Jason clenched his teeth, his mind racing. He had escaped, but that wasn't the same as being safe. Darius, Zane, the hooded man, the game. He was in deeper than he ever imagined. And Darius's smile as Jason fled, that terrified him the most. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was amusement. Like Darius already knew how this would end. Jason squeezed his eyes shut. No, he wouldn't let them control him. He wouldn't be their next victim. He just had to figure out how to beat the game. They pulled into the driveway. His mom rushed to help him out of the car, but Jason waved her off. "I can walk," he muttered. She gave him a worried look but didn't argue. Inside, she led him straight to the bathroom and grabbed the first aid kit. Jason winced as she peeled back his hoodie. "Jason," her voice trembled. "This wasn't just a fight, was it?" He stayed silent. She let out a shaky breath. "You have to tell me what's going on." Jason wanted to, but how could he explain something he barely understood? The mysterious game, the text messages, the shadow at his window, the way people disappeared. If he told her, she'd never believe him. So he did the only thing he could. He lied. "It's complicated," he muttered, "but I'll handle it." His mom's face twisted with frustration and fear. "Handle it? Jason, I found you bleeding in the street. I should call the police." Jason's pulse spiked. "No!" He snapped too quickly. She froze. Jason inhaled sharply, forcing himself to calm down. "I mean, please don't. It'll just make things worse." His mom hesitated, then reluctantly nodded. "Fine. But this isn't over, Jason." He knew she wouldn't let it go. But for now, he had bought himself some time. Later that night, Jason sat in his dark room, staring at his phone. He should have been resting. He should have been thinking about how to protect himself. Instead, he was doing something incredibly stupid. He was calling Zane. The phone rang and rang. Then, a click. "Jason," Zane's voice came through tense. "You shouldn't be calling me." Jason's grip tightened. "You set me up." Zane sighed. "I didn't have a choice." "Like hell you didn't," Jason snapped. "You let them stab me, Zane." "I didn't let them." Zane hissed. "You think I have control over Darius? Over any of this? I was just trying to warn you." Jason gritted his teeth. "Then start talking." Now, there was silence. Then Zane whispered, "The game doesn't end until it decides to." Jason's blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" Zane's voice dropped lower. "You're still playing Jason, whether you want to or not." Jason's breath caught. The call ended. A cold chill crept down his spine. Then, a notification popped up on his screen. His heart stopped. It was from the unknown number. "Unknown, your next challenge starts now." Jason's throat went dry. Then another message. "Unknown, check under your bed." Jason's fingers trembled. Slowly, he turned his head toward his bed. A shadow shifted beneath it. Something was there. Jason's breath hitched. Then, a hand shot out from the darkness. Jason jerked back, so fast he nearly fell off the bed. His heart hammered against his ribs as the hand stretched out from beneath the bed, pale and twitching. For a split second, he was frozen in sheer terror. Then instinct kicked in. Jason grabbed the lamp from his nightstand and swung it down as hard as he could. Crack! The lamp shattered on impact. The hand snapped back under the bed. Jason scrambled off the mattress, panting. His eyes locked onto the darkness beneath his bed, waiting, dreading. What would happen next? Silence. Then, a low, raspy whisper. Tick-tock. "Jason." Jason's blood turned to ice. He lunged for the light switch and flicked it on. The room flooded with brightness. But when he looked back under the bed, there was nothing there. No hand. No shadow. Just empty space. Jason's stomach twisted. Had he imagined it? No. No way. His phone buzzed. With shaky fingers, he picked it up. "Unknown." You hesitated. Jason's breath caught. Another message came through. "Unknown. Next time, you might not be so lucky." Jason's grip tightened on the phone. His whole body shook with anger and fear. He was done being a pawn in this twisted game. He needed to end this. The next morning, Jason barely touched his breakfast. His mom kept glancing at him, concern written all over her face. "Jason," she said gently, "I know you don't want to talk about what happened, but—" "I'm fine," he muttered. She frowned. "You're not fine. You're pale, you barely slept, and you keep looking over your shoulder like someone's after you." Jason's fork clenched in his hand. She wasn't wrong. And if he wasn't careful, this game wouldn't just hurt him. It would drag his mom into it too. He couldn't let that happen. Jason stood up abruptly. "I gotta go." His mom's expression darkened. "Where?" "I just—" He ran a hand through his hair. "I need some air." She sighed but didn't push. "Be careful, okay?" Jason nodded. But deep down he knew he wouldn't be careful, because he was walking straight into danger. Jason didn't go to school. He didn't go to the park. He went to Zane's house. The second he knocked on the door, Zane opened it like he'd been expecting him. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "You shouldn't be here," Zane muttered. Jason shoved past him. "Too bad." Zane shut the door, rubbing his temples. "Jason, you don't get it. Once you're in the game, you can't quit." Jason's fist clenched. "I don't care. There has to be a way out." Zane hesitated. His eyes darted to the window, like he was afraid someone was watching. Then he sighed. "There's a way. Maybe." Jason's breath hitched. "Tell me." Zane hesitated again. Then he pulled out his phone and typed something. A second later, Jason's phone buzzed. Jason glanced down. It was an address. "The last person who tried to escape," Zane whispered. "Go there." "But Jason, be careful." Jason swallowed hard. "Who is it?" Zane's face darkened. His name was Elijah. And if the rumors are true, he looked Jason dead in the eyes. He's the only one who ever beat the game. Jason's pulse spiked. There was a way out, but he had no idea what it would cost him. That night, Jason stood outside an old, abandoned house. The windows were boarded up. The roof sagged. The whole place reeked of something wrong. His stomach twisted. Was this a trap? Only one way to find out. Jason took a deep breath and stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him. The lights flickered. Then a voice whispered from the darkness. "You shouldn't have come here, Jason." Darkness swallowed the room. Jason froze. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as the whisper echoed in his ears. "Time's up." A cold shiver crawled down his spine. He spun around, heart hammering, but there was no one there. Just a suffocating darkness and the eerie humming of something unseen. Then his phone buzzed again. His trembling hands lifted the screen. "Unknown, you have 60 seconds to choose." Jason's pulse spiked. The final challenge. But choose what? He frantically unfolded the paper Elijah had given him. His eyes darted over the messy handwriting. The game was never about winning. It was about control. The moment you make a choice, you lose. Break the cycle. Jason's breath hitched. Break the cycle? The phone buzzed again. Unknown. 30 seconds left. Jason's mind raced. Everyone who played the game lost. They followed the rules, obeyed the messages, and one by one, they were trapped. Elijah had survived because he never played by their rules. Jason clenched his jaw. He knew what he had to do. The phone buzzed again. Unknown. 10 seconds left. Choose. Jason took a deep breath and did the one thing the game never expected. He turned off his phone. The second the screen went black, the room shook. A violent, deafening screech filled the air, like something furious was being ripped apart. The walls trembled. The floor cracked. A dark, swirling void seemed to pull at reality itself. Jason gritted his teeth, fighting against the force trying to drag him in. "No!" he shouted. "I don't play your game anymore." The screech intensified, and then silence. The room was still. The humming was gone. Jason's chest heaved. He turned his phone back on. Nothing. No messages. No threats. The game was over. Jason staggered back, his legs weak. He stared at the phone, half expecting another message to pop up. But it didn't. For the first time in days, Jason felt free. 2 weeks passed. Jason never got another message. No shadows followed him home. No whispers in the dark. It was like the game had never happened. But he knew better. He knew it was real. One night, as he sat in his room, his phone buzzed. Jason's stomach dropped. He hesitated, then picked it up. It was from Zane. Zane, you did it. You really broke the cycle. Jason exhaled, relief washing over him. He started to type a reply. Then another message popped up. Unknown. Not everyone gets to leave, Jason. Jason's blood ran cold. He felt it before he saw it. A shadow stretching from under his bed. And a whisper, so close it sent chills down his spine. Round 2